Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Jallow enthusiasts, and a special welcome to all newcomers to the channel. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, the channel dedicated to covering all things Jallow and Jallow adjacent. For this special episode, I wanted to talk to y'all about the third film in the A24 horror trilogy by director Ti West, MaXXXine. Why is that? Well, because according to Ti West, this third film in the trilogy is meant to be an homage to the Italian giallo film genre and to its most prolific director, Dario Argento, the man behind the original Suspiria and several of the greatest giallo films in the genre, including The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Deep Red, and Tenebrae, films which themselves are in the crosshairs for modern filmmakers to be remade. The three films in this trilogy are all homages to older film genres and classic films. With X, we have obvious nods to the grindhouse genre of the 1970s, as well as the early proto-slasher films from the 1960s through the 70s. The slasher genre has early beginnings, but did not officially kick off until years later, near the end of the 70s, and took off in the early 1980s. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974 and Eaten Alive 1976, both grindhouse films directed by Tobe Hooper, are some of the primary film's X homages. X also has elements of Boogie Nights 1997 by Paul Thomas Anderson, along with several visual cues and set pieces to the 1960 film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. As for its prequel, Pearl, the film has many more visual homages to Psycho and is described as a demented Disney film combining the melodramatic films of Douglas Sirk with the Technicolor achievements of Mary Poppins and The Wizard of Oz. And with MaXXXine, Ti West said he was inspired by the films of Dario Argento, specifically Suspiria 1977, which is not strictly speaking a giallo. I have a video on that, but that's beside the point. Plus, West was inspired by the Italian horror director Lucio Fulci, especially his late giallo film, The New York Ripper 1982. The aesthetic of the killer in MaXXXine, wearing a dark trench coat, donning a hat and mask, and clad in black gloves, is the quintessential giallo killer look. The inclusions of art, fashion, and sex work, including a scene at a peep show, are hallmarks of the giallo film genre as well. The deep and vibrant colored lighting was a stylistic choice of numerous of the films, and coincidentally enough, the best examples are perhaps The New York Ripper and Suspiria. But for the newcomers, what is giallo? Giallo is a thriller subgenre invented in Italy by filmmakers Mario Bava with his films The Girl Who Knew Too Much 1963 and Blood and Blacklace 1964, the latter of which introduced the killer aesthetic seen in MaXXXine. In short, giallo is a mystery genre. The word giallo means yellow in Italian, and the name comes from a series of paperback mystery magazines from the early 20th century featuring lurid and provocative yellow covers. Giallo films can have ties to other film genres, including horror, gothic, crime, sexploitation, film noir, psychological thriller, splatter films, and slashers. In fact, the giallo film Torso, 1973 by Sergio Martino, is considered by many to be the first slasher film. Most of the giallo films are whodunit slashers. Not all though, but certainly the more popular ones. The killers in giallo are unknown for most of the running time, and the gender is also not revealed until the end usually. The main characters are as frequently women as they are men. Typically, the killer's motive is out of greed, trying to kill others to secure a fortune. Sometimes it is a reaction to blackmail, or revenge, or psychological trauma, or mental illness, some form of psychopathy or an obsession. Or in the later entries, being more focused on sexual violence, the killer has some sexual perversion or hang-up. Sometimes, the killer can be obsessed with killing sexually scandalous women because they view themselves as enacting vengeance on sinful individuals, or for the sake of protecting the innocence of someone like a child of theirs. The motives are usually corrupt. Part of the fun of a giallo is trying to piece together who the killer might be and what their motivations are. Viewers have to keep track of all the little details and sift through the red herrings, which is a story term referring to characters or items which are intentionally meant to distract the audience and the investigator and to mislead them. The creepy stalker character, the abusive ex-husband, the criminal known to police are all examples of cliché red herrings. Also, sometimes in giallo, the killer is actually more than one person. Sometimes, one of these killers, or the accomplice, does get murdered by the killer who decides later on that it would be safer for them to work alone. If the killer is more than one person, it is common to see one or both of the killers portrayed as a victim at some point in the narrative, but usually they get away. For example, a friend of the main character who survives an attempted murder might be working with the killer actually, and this was all just a ploy to misdirect suspicion away from them. Our main characters usually are trying to solve the mystery of the killer and their motive, and they can be police inspectors or detectives, or private investigators, or even a reporter motivated by the prospect of having the story. But usually, they are normal people taking on the investigation as amateur sleuths, and they are motivated by being a primary suspect by the police, and they are trying to prove themselves innocent, or they are enacting revenge for someone dear to them who is a victim of the killer, or perhaps they have otherwise just become obsessed with solving it, maybe because the police are incompetent. It is important to know that the genre is more than just whodunit slashers, however. They are also psychological thrillers dealing with characters losing their grip on reality. Often, a kill or two might be happening in the background, and typically these types of plots deal with another character trying to drive the protagonist over the edge into insanity, usually so they can steal their fortune or gain something from them. In these cases, it is common for the protagonist to be blamed for the killings and their sanity to be questioned, a thing commonly done in the 1960s giallo films. Something I am not too crazy about is for the plot to copy the 1955 French thriller film Les Diaboliques and have a character gripping with their mindset against the notion of someone they know being murdered or killed, and whether that person is in fact really dead. Are they seeing their ghost, or is the quote-unquote deceased person or someone else playing mind games so that the protagonist will snap? Occasionally, the protagonist will be the killer as the reveal, or in a few rare instances, the killer is the main character known right from the jump, and we follow to see what drove them to this point and if they will be able to get away with the murders and keep their sanity intact. Some people will say that these are not giallo films, but they are incorrect. But giallo is more than just the plot elements and the characters. The genre, very much like Italian spaghetti western films, is heavily stylistic, sometimes drawing a lot of attention to itself, and employs genius use of music, sound and lighting, and camera work. Look out for intense crash zooms, noticeable focus racks or fading, point of view shots, often of the killer, close-ups on eyes, as well as zooms on eyes, mirror shots, insert close-up shots of things like knives being wielded by the killer, and crazy visual shots like spinning cameras, kaleidoscopic shots, and slow-mos. The lights can be intense colored lights. The music ranges from jazzy to progressive rock, heavily synthetic, or even sounding pornographic with sultry saxophones or sounds of women sighing. The famous film composer Ennio Morricone did dozens of the soundtracks, but some of the other best Italian film composers also worked on these films, as well as the prog rock band Goblin. Modern film audiences who have seen the films of Quentin Tarantino have heard at least half a dozen musical tracks taken right from Giallo films, such as from The Psychic by Lucio Fulci, and The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward by Sergio Martino.
That woman deserves her revenge.
One American filmmaker heavily inspired by the Giallo film genre is Brian De Palma, whose film Dressed to Kill is an American Giallo. Some modern Giallo films and Giallo-adjacent films include Eyes of Laura Mars, Blowout, Raising Cain, Scream, in fact, the entire franchise is, Basic Instinct, Perfect Blue, Malignant, and Last Night in Soho. And lastly, without the Giallo film genre dominating the 1970s, it is very likely that the American slasher film genre of the 1980s would have developed very differently. Giallo walked so the slasher could run. In fact, the main difference I would say between the two genres is that the Italian genre was heavily influenced by the Giallo Mondadori magazines mentioned earlier, and mystery novels by Agatha Christie, gothic horror tales by Edgar Allan Poe, penny dreadful magazines, and the thrillers of Alfred Hitchcock, while the American slasher was heavily influenced by predominantly the Universal monster movies. Many iconic slasher killers are closer to monsters than they are to real persons, a staple of Giallo being that at the end of the day, the explanation and cause must be rooted in reality. There may be elements of the supernatural, such as a character who is a medium, or a seance being performed, or even a character who is psychic, but ultimately, the story is rooted in reality, contrasting slasher films which might be rooted in reality, but are very frequently modernized versions of the older monster movie genre. Killers in slashers can be larger than life, unstoppable forces of evil, or, at their closest ties to Giallo, they are merely humans. Finally, I want to say that the main red herring from MaXXXine is the Night Stalker, a sadistic, real-life serial killer who terrorized Los Angeles County from 1984 to 1985. While the identity of the Night Stalker was unknown for several months during his killing spree, mostly through 1984, the man, Richard Ramirez, was finally identified and apprehended in 1985. If you care to learn more about the Night Stalker, I cannot recommend enough the docuseries on Netflix, Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer, an amazing 4-part true crime documentary miniseries that came out in 2021.
I said, I won't scream. I swear upon God. And he said, swear upon Satan.
You could sense it. There's evil in that man.
Sometimes, however, the red herring in the telling is actually the killer. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, ring the notification bell so you are always alerted of my new content, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Which is your favorite movie in the X trilogy and why? What is your favorite Giallo film? How much of a Giallo do you think MaXXXine is? Let me know in the comments down below. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Subscribe to The King in Giallo Patreon to see early access to my videos, with some videos able to be seen up to a month in advance, plus exclusive content found only there, such as the viewings, The King in Giallo podcast, the Giallo adjacent podcast, the Giallo Reads book reviews, the Rat Hole Burn movie reviews, and Let's Plays for Giallo inspired games. Free 7-day trials are up now. A special thank you for your continued support, or for those who are newly subscribed. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Y'all might as well go home because I just fucking nailed that.